Welcome to WHMIS, short form or acronym for Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System. WHMIS is a Canada-wide system created by government, business, and labor to protect the health and safety of everyone who works with or near hazardous workplace materials. A controlled product is the name given to a product, material, or substance that is deemed a hazardous material. These controlled products are regulated by WHMIS and fall into one or more hazard classes, each uniquely identified by a symbol for quick recognition.
WHMIS has three main parts. 1. Hazardous material container labels that supply basic information about the product, along with symbols that highlight the potential dangers. All containers of hazardous materials must be properly labeled. 2. Material safety data sheets that contain comprehensive information about hazardous materials, including their content and ingredients, directions for proper use, correct cleanup, and first aid procedures. An MSDS must be available to employees for every controlled product that is used. 3. Education to ensure anyone working with hazardous materials knows the potential dangers and the correct handling methods for these products. Under WHMIS regulation, you have a right to know about the hazardous materials in your workplace. Your employer is responsible to train you and those who work in proximity to hazardous materials.
The two most important parts of WHMIS are labels and material safety data sheets, also known as MSDS for short. There are three types of labels: supplier labels, workplace labels, and laboratory labels. Supplier labels. The supplier label is affixed to the product container by the supplier. The label must be shown in English and French with a distinctive hatched border and contain the following information: product name, supplier name, reference to the material safety data sheet, hazard symbol, risks posed by the product, safety measures to be followed, and first aid measures. The hazard symbol that appears on the supplier label is very important. It provides you with information about the primary hazard posed by a product. It also indicates whether the product is dangerous to touch or breathe, is easily combustible, unstable, or reacts negatively when mixed with other materials.
Workplace labels. Along with supplier labels, you may come across workplace labels. This is a simplified version of a supplier label and may be used when hazardous materials are made in the workplace or when hazardous materials are poured from the original container into another container. The employer is responsible for affixing workplace labels to these containers. The label requires three pieces of information. 1. The product's name. 2. Safe handling procedures. 3. The statement "Refer to MSDS." By the way, this label does not require a hatched border, hazard symbols, or special wording.
Laboratory labels. The third type of label is the laboratory label. A controlled product that is intended for lab use only does not need a supplier label if it meets these conditions. 1. Comes from a lab supply house. 2. Weighs less than 10 kilograms. If you work in a laboratory setting, you will get job-specific applications of WHMIS guidelines.
MSDS, the Material Safety Data Sheet, is a much more detailed listing of key information about a hazardous product. It contains more data than can fit on a label. An MSDS must be current and updated every 3 years, or as new information becomes available. Your supervisor should inform you of the location of the MSDS in your department. It should be in an area that is readily accessible at all times, on all shifts, for all employees.
There are 9 sections in a material safety data sheet. Section 1, Product Identification, provides the name of the product. Section 2, Hazardous Ingredients, lists the ingredients within the product that are hazardous. Section 3, Physical Data, describes the product's physical characteristics, such as whether it is a gas, liquid, or solid, its color and appearance, its boiling and freezing points. Section 4, Fire and Explosion Data, deals with how likely it is that the product will catch fire or explode under different conditions. Section 5, Reactivity Data, describes what the product will do if exposed to other chemicals or conditions.
Section 6, Toxicological Properties, describes how it can affect a worker's health. Section 7, Preventative measures describes the ways that the product should be handled, used, stored, cleaned up, and disposed of. Section 8. First aid procedures describes what should be done if a person has been affected by or overexposed to the hazardous materials in the product. Section 9. Preparation date of the MSDS tells when the document was produced and by whom. An MSDS must not be older than 3 years before being renewed. Not all safety sheets have these sections in the same order, but all 9 sections must appear.
A material safety data sheet can look intimidating, and it does contain a lot of complex scientific information. The important sections to read are sections 6, 7, and 8. These will provide you with important information on the ways this material could affect your health, what you must do to use this product safely, for example, what protective clothing to wear, and what first aid is necessary should something go wrong.
Health and safety hazards. Controlled products can be hazardous to your health if you do not limit your exposure to them. As you handle these materials, you will need to know whether they are health hazards or safety hazards. A health hazard is the ability of a chemical to affect your health quickly, for example, a burn, or over a long period of time, for example, cancer or lead poisoning. A safety hazard is a sudden reaction, such as a fire or explosion. Safety hazards are controlled by handling chemicals properly. Referring to the MSDS is the safest way to use, handle, and store hazardous material.
Hazardous materials in the workplace are classified into 3 categories: biological, chemical, physical. Biological hazard. Biological hazards are living organisms or properties that can adversely affect your health. A needle stick injury is an example of an accidental exposure to possible blood-borne pathogens. Chemical hazard. Chemical hazards include inhalation of fumes and powders. They also include skin contact from splashes, spills, and touch. The MSDS contains safety information on the hazardous components, chemical characteristics, and the stability of the product and first aid measures.
Physical hazard. Physical hazards are environmental. They include temperature, noise, vibration, and radiation. Hazard control. The most effective way to control exposures to hazardous material is at the source by eliminating, substituting, or isolating the hazard. The second best control is along the path. This includes the use of controls such as general ventilation, barriers, or shields. The least satisfactory method for controlling a hazard is at the worker. This includes personal protective equipment, job rotation, and good personal hygiene.
Hazard classifications. When a material is listed as a controlled product, the manufacturer must treat the product according to WMIS regulations. Part of this regulation is to classify it according to a hazard class. The WMIS system groups hazardous materials into 6 distinct classifications and uses 8 symbols to help you identify them. A Class A hazard is compressed gas. These are gases such as oxygen or acetylene that are under extreme pressure within cylinders. These cylinders could explode if heated or dropped. They must be stored and handled very carefully.
A Class B hazard is flammable and combustible material. These materials will ignite and burn if exposed to a flame. Gasoline, propane, and varnish are examples of Class B hazards. These must be kept away from flames or sparks, and you must wear protective clothing, for example, gloves, eye, and face protection, when handling them.
A Class C hazard is oxidizing material. These materials may release oxygen, which makes things burn faster. Examples include bleach and hydrogen peroxide. You must keep them away from flames and never mix them with other materials. Also, do not drop or shake such products.
Class D hazards are poisonous and infectious materials. There are 3 categories of Class D hazards. Class D1 hazards are materials causing immediate and serious toxic effects. These are extremely dangerous materials that could be fatal if swallowed or inhaled. Examples include sulfuric acid, carbon monoxide, and hydrogen sulfide. Class D2 hazards are materials causing toxic effects. These materials may be harmful to your health with frequent and prolonged exposure. Examples include benzene, propane, silica, and asbestos. You must ensure that work areas are well ventilated when using these materials and avoid direct contact with them.
Class D3 hazards are biohazardous infectious materials. These are organisms or toxins that may cause serious infectious disease, for example, hepatitis B. Class E hazards are corrosive materials. These materials may react with metals or skin on contact. Sulfuric acid, chlorine gas, and bleach are examples. You must ensure proper ventilation when using these materials and wear protective equipment to keep these materials from touching any part of your body, especially your eyes, which could cause blindness.
Class F hazards are dangerously reactive materials. These are extremely dangerous materials that cannot be shaken, dropped, or heated. These could also create dangerous gases if mixed with water. Fortunately, it is very unlikely you will come across such materials in your daily work life. However, there is a possibility such materials could be found in some specific environments, such as science lab storage facilities.
Hazard symbols. Take a look at this symbol. This means that the gas within the cylinder may explode because it is under pressure, may explode if heated in a fire, may explode if dropped or crushed. Therefore, you should handle cylinders with care. Do not drop them. Keep cylinders away from direct heat such as furnaces or open flames. Store cylinders in areas designated by your supervisor.
Have a look at this symbol. This means that the material is one that burns easily and is a potential fire hazard. May burn at relatively low temperatures. Flammable materials catch fire at lower temperatures than combustible materials. May suddenly burn in the air or release a flammable gas on contact with water. May cause a fire when exposed to heat, sparks, flames, or friction. Therefore, you should keep the material away from heat sources. Separate the material from other combustible and incompatible materials. Never smoke when working with or near the material. Store the material in a cool, well-ventilated area, as designated by your immediate supervisor.
See this symbol? This means that the material may burn or explode in the presence of flammable or combustible material, may cause fire when it touches combustible materials such as wood, may react violently or cause an explosion when it comes into contact with combustible materials such as fuels, may burn skin and eyes on contact. Therefore, you should keep the material away from incompatible materials and store in the areas designated by your immediate supervisor. Keep the material away from sources of ignition. Never smoke when working near the material. Wear the proper protective equipment, including eyes, face, and hand protection and protective clothing.
Look at this well-known symbol. This means that the material may be potentially fatal if inhaled, swallowed, or makes contact with skin. May cause permanent damage if inhaled, swallowed, or makes contact with skin. May burn eyes or skin upon contact. Therefore, you should handle the material with extreme caution. Wear the proper protective equipment, including eye, face, and hand protection and protective clothing. Wear the proper respiratory equipment and work in well-ventilated areas. Wash thoroughly after handling the material. Store the material in designated areas only.
Recognize this symbol? This means that the material is not immediately dangerous to health. May cause death as a result of repeated exposures over time. May cause permanent damage as a result of repeated exposures over time. May be a skin or eye irritant. May produce a chemical allergy. May cause cancer. May cause birth defects or sterility. Therefore, you should wear the proper protective equipment, including eye, face, and hand protection and protective clothing. Wear the proper respiratory equipment and work in well-ventilated areas. Wash thoroughly after handling the material. Store the material in designated areas only.
Here's another symbol you need to be familiar with. This means that the material may cause a serious disease resulting in illness or death, may produce a toxin that is harmful to humans. Therefore, you should avoid contamination by wearing protective equipment. Handle the material only when fully protected by the proper designated equipment. Handle the material in designated areas that are approved by your immediate supervisor.
Have a look at this symbol. This means that the material causes severe eye and skin irritation upon contact, causes severe tissue damage with prolonged contact, may be harmful if inhaled. Therefore, you should keep containers tightly closed. Handle the material only when using appropriate protective clothing. Handle the material in well-ventilated areas and wear proper respiratory equipment.
And here's our last symbol you need to know. This means that the material is very unstable, may produce a toxic or flammable gas when reacting with other materials, may explode as a result of shock, friction, or temperature changes, may explode when heated in a closed container, violently changes when mixed with certain chemicals. Therefore, you should keep the material away from heat. Handle containers with extreme care. Do not drop or shake the chemicals. Check the date on the containers. Store the material in a cool, flame-proof area as designated by your immediate supervisor.
Conclusion.
The goal of occupational health and safety laws and programs are to create a safe and healthy workplace. WHMIS, as an integral part of these, is successful only when suppliers, employers, and employees assume their responsibilities.
The knowledge you have gained here will help you deal more safely with hazardous materials and keep your workplace safe from the dangers posed by these materials. This will better ensure your own safety and the safety of others.